Chapter 11, The Last Sniffler. Mayo. Kino's power was interesting, although when he said that he could copy other people's abilities, he was not exactly able to display his new powers to me. The crazy thing was, he could not even run like the wind anymore. All he did was make himself invisible. And now, he had lost the power to grow vines. Weird power, if you ask me. Somehow, I felt like my power was better than his. That was comforting to think, for once. "Quit the long face, Kino," I said, trying to cheer him up. He only frowned even more. I was wrong. I thought that I could copy anyone's power, but if I could, then why can I only make myself invisible? Exactly what I thought, but I tried so hard not to say it out loud. "Hey, maybe you copied my power," I said. He puffed air from his mouth as though in frustration. "What makes you think that?" "Have you tried it?" I asked, throwing him an apple. "Here you go. Try to make the bad bits go away." Kino stared at the apple. His lips were tightly closed. Then right before our eyes, the red apple turned purple. "I got it," he said, matter-of-factly. "I copied your power too." "Then why do you sound as though you're not happy about it?" Kino kept silent. At that moment, Pyper returned from the marketplace. "Here's more food for us," she said. She noticed that we were both staring at the apple Kino was holding. "What did you do?" she asked. Kino tossed the apple to Pyper. Pyper had to put down her pack quickly before she grabbed the purple apple. "I did that," Kino said. "So you finally figured out what your power really is?" Kino shrugged. "Seems that way, but it's inconclusive. And if my power is like this, it's no use to me at all." "You're horrible," I said. "I thought you were a friend. After copying my power, you say that it's no use to you at all? What does that make me, huh?" "Don't make this your issue, Mayo. I didn't mean to say that your power was awful," Kino defended. "It's great. Remember, you saved Pyper's life." I blushed. "Then what do you mean?" "My power. If I can only copy powers and couldn't even keep track of what power I'm copying, then it's like having nothing at all. How can I nurture it? Like right now," he said before winking in and out. "I can turn invisible, and I can make this apple purple. And yet, yesterday, I was able to make vines grow. A while ago, I was able to run very, very fast." Kino and Pyper slumped to the ground. I took Pyper's pack and searched for food. "Great, berries." "Can't you do that now?" Pyper asked. Kino shook his head. "I tried, but I'm back to running at a pace that would make the tortoises seem like sprinters." I laughed. I could not help it. Kino was so funny when he was being reasonable. I only stopped when Pyper gave me the evil eye. "But that's so weird. How can you use your power to defend yourself if you don't know what it is?" Pyper asked. "Maybe each time I meet someone, I'll ask him, 'Hey, what's your power? I need to know because before you kill me, I was wondering if I could use it to defend myself against you," Kino grumbled. I laughed again. Kino was hilarious. "It could work," I said, trying to catch my breath as I laughed. Kino shot me a dirty look. "It's a useless power. I wish I could be invisible all the time." "Think about it. Maybe there are signs when you copy a new power. A tingling of sorts. A beeping in your ears. Anything at all?" Pyper asked. Kino paused, considering, until finally saying, "I'm not sure." "Maybe it has something to do with the distance," Mayo said. "You said that you couldn't turn invisible when Pyper was far from you." Kino's eyes brightened. Now that makes sense. Mayo, you're a genius. Let's try," he said before quickly standing up. Then he made himself invisible. Pyper and I sat waiting for him to return. A few minutes passed by, and still, no Kino. I picked a grass stalk to chew on and lay down on the ground to pass the time. Suddenly, he appeared, hovering over me. I yelped in surprise. Kino. Quit doing that, I said. The grass stalk I was chewing on fell from my lips. So? Pyper asked. I walked more than a mile, and my body never flickered. I was invisible all throughout. And now I'm back here again, still invisible, he said, disappointed. We should be able to talk this out with someone else. Maybe somebody knows what your power's called. Well, we could check the registry, I said. I bet Kino's name was the last entry. Wait a minute, Pyper said. Our first task is to look for Kino's father. But do we know where to look for him? I asked. We all had no answers to that question. Maybe the registry is where we should look first, Kino said, eyeing me. Mayo's right. I gasped as a bright idea hit me. And, think about it, it could give us a clue about Kino's father. Maybe he inherited the power from his father. Kino smiled, and this time, the smile did touch his eyes. Wow! That would be so grand. Pyper was nodding, smiling. So, what are we waiting for? My throat constricted in panic. I don't feel so good suddenly, I murmured. And I was not even lying. Were we really going back to Canella? After everything that happened, are we going to saunter back to the palace, right into the Emperor's backyard? I felt sick. Sick because it seemed it was my idea in the first place. Pyper held my hand. I understand, she said. Kino's face had gone ashen. We were children, after all. And we had no way of defending ourselves. Let's forget about the registry for a while, Pyper said. I heard that a magician is back in the market. Loonduns call him the Swordless Swordsman. Isn't his name awesome? She asked, grinning. It worked. I could feel my heartbeat going in steady rhythms again. I grinned at Kino, who was also smiling as widely as Pyper and I. Let's go, Kino said. I haven't seen a magician perform in moon turns. I nodded at high speed. I wonder what he does, I mumbled. If he's a swordless swordsman, does that mean he performs magic without a sword? What does he do, unslice things? Pyper and Kino laughed. Soon, we were walking side by side towards the Loondu Market.
Quila Tash. Arden looked upset, but his jaw was set, and I knew that whatever happened in the Loondun woods would somehow be forgotten as soon as we started performing. Are you ready? I asked. Arden studied our audience. We were at our usual spot in the market. My box was laid in front of us, and the puppets were on top of it. Today, I would tell the tale of the giant hubbub. It was always a children's favorite, and I hoped that Loonduns would be generous in giving us coins. A silver mark would be delightful. Arden exhaled before saying, "Come on, chum, let's do this." That was all the encouragement I needed. I bent down, took the puppets, and then sat behind the box so that only my upper body and the puppets showed. "Do your thing now," he said, although somewhat coldly. I nodded before bellowing in my loudest, crisp imitation of a voice. "Dear everyone. Greetings. Today, I will tell you the tale of the giant hubbub." Some passers-by stopped walking and glanced at me. A few eyes widened upon seeing that the voice came from me. I made my voice into a deep growl and began, "I am Dodo, the giant hubbub." The puppet opened its mouth as though it was the one speaking. A few children tugged at their mother's hands and begged them to sit in front of me. Dodo is always hungry. Its eyes blazing red as it wanders in Canella looking for food. Its head twisted sideways to search for the children with the fattest thighs. I moved my left hand that was holding the puppet of a bear. "My thighs are not juicy, nor are they fatty." The bear growled. Dodo stopped, eyeing the bear. "Maybe not juicy, but once I devour you, I can go back to the forest and hide. But you," he hissed. "You will do for now." "Ha ha ha." I made the bear puppet leap and ran away, and the children who were watching shrieked. Then I made Dodo the hubbub fly. It swooped down over the bear while I made a gurgling sound, opening Dodo's mouth widely. It took the bear in its mouth. "Goodbye, Sir Bear," Dodo said. I glanced up at my audience and saw that the number of children had started to increase. A fat boy eating an apple stood at the back. He stopped biting on the apple upon seeing Dodo devour the bear. "Now, where do I go?" Dodo said. I put my left hand inside a soldier puppet and made it move. I modulated my voice and made it sound deep like a handsome prince's. "Aha! The king asked me to cut the head of a beast. I will offer your head to the princess," the soldier said. I made loud, laughing guttural sounds. "Oh no, you won't," Dodo said. "Your sword won't touch me. Not as fast as I can lick your belly button." The children laughed. That line always drove the audience nuts. Then the soldier struck with his sword and the hubbub's head was cut. It fell off as I removed my right hand inside the puppet. The children applauded. I was beaming when it was over. I quickly glanced at Arden, who wasn't paying attention to my story. He was hunched over, playing with his hat. A solemn look crossed his face. "It's your turn," I yelled at Arden. Arden shook his head. "I'm not ready." My mouth hung open in surprise. "What? But you do the slashing thing all the time." "Yeah, but he cut short before squeezing his eyes shut. When he opened them again, he exhaled loudly. "Please. Give me some more time. Tell them another story. The tale of the great black egg. I'm sure everyone would love it." "I only do one story at a time," I protested. "Quila, I'm asking you a favor now. There are lots of things in my head, so if you could just..." All right. I'll do it," I said in exasperation. I sighed. It had been a long time since I last performed the tale of the great black egg, and the last time, I didn't even want to think about it. I went back to the center of the crowd and rummaged under the box until my hand got hold of a shiny black egg. I picked it up and raised it upward before roaring like a dragon, "Rawr!" Everybody stopped talking. Silence permeated the air. I closed my eyes, trying to remember the great black egg story. I never saw one, not ever, and sometimes I wondered if there really were dragons in the past. There were stories about the last great black egg, which mentioned that it was hidden somewhere by its mother dragon before she died frozen in an ice storm. But the stories turned into myths, and even the myths faded when moon turns came and went, and there were no signs of these fire-breathing creatures. I tried to remember its history, and when all that I knew about it had come back to me, I opened my eyes and began. In the olden days, dragons roamed Akean. Every land flourished because dragons were able to provide fire to melt metals, and metals were used for making tools and monies. There was peace all over the land because each province had a dragon to its name, and dragons, being fierce creatures, would not back out in war, and hence, for the preservation of each province in Akean, the kings and queens agreed to settle all disputes without even engaging in warfare. Talks about the war were ridiculous during that time. Peace lasted for centuries, until one day, King Rm of Karasthea realized that dragons have specific strengths and weaknesses, and therefore, among all the kings and queens in the land, it could be that one of them can rule the whole of Akean. He proposed that dragons must be tested by making them fight in an arena. The weak would perish, and the strong would rule. It would be a battle that would determine who should be hailed as the emperor. The kings and queens of the other provinces objected to the proposal, calling King Rm names for even thinking of harming the dragons. The citizens made protests. Rebels marched the fields. Arms were raised because nobody wanted to lose a dragon to such an unreasonable cause. But the ruler of Karasthea contended that since the biggest volcano in Akean is in his land, his province must decide on such matters. Nobody agreed because all of the rulers wanted equality in power, which each of them enjoyed. All of them, save for one. King Rm of Karasthea believed that his dragons were the superior ones, and to prove such a point, he ventured on a dragon hunt. In a matter of months, 7 provinces had lost their dragons. When winter came, the lands froze and the rulers of the other provinces took the journey to the Karasthea volcanoes to ensure that their dragons would be protected from the cold weather. This had been a tradition ever since, but this moon turn, King Rm closed the gates of Karasthea to any dragon, save for those that his kingdom owned. When spring came, the ice melted, but not all provinces were lucky enough to save their dragons. The eggs that did not receive sufficient warmth had rotten. Thus, even in the absence of the war, King Rm was able to get what he wanted, the annihilation of all the other dragons but his. Unbeknownst to him, However, the newly founded province of Canela was still rearing its last dragon. The young ruler of the land, Dwi Ariston Amerk, would not let his family's dragon die without a fight. He asked for the blessing of his ancestors and, upon receiving it, set on a journey with his dragon Akarasthea. It was said that King Dwi was so valiant that even though his dragon was still too young to fly, it survived the long flight to Karasthea. News had traveled all over the land that there were no more dragons except for those in Karasthea, so King Dwi headed straight to the volcanoes where he hid for 11 moon turns. During this time, King Rm declared war all over the land and named himself the very first emperor of Achaea. The rulers of all the other lands had opposed the new emperor's dictatorship, and they met in secret to avenge the death of their dragons and to overthrow the emperor. To do this, they agreed that they would kill all the golden dragons of Karasthea. So they made themselves ready and journeyed towards the gates of Karasthea. It was rumored that King Rm only had 7 dragons left. All male, except for one. The fighters from the other provinces all set out to kill the female dragon first. If the female is dead, there is no way to breed another. Balance to the land would be restored. So they chased after the female dragon until an arrow pierced its breast. The dragon swooped and fell into the ocean. When King Rm learned about the hunt, he released all of his 6 dragons to ravage the fighters from all the lands. But with the triumph of killing the female dragon, the rebels' stamina was unmatched, and they were inspired to put an end to the tyranny that King Rm had placed upon Achaea. Weeks passed before all of the king's dragons were slain. Meanwhile, in the volcanoes of Karasthea, King Dwi and his black dragon were still hiding. Now that a moon turn had passed, the dragon had grown, and its body had become enormous. Its eyes were golden, its scales glistening black. The span of its wings boasted a good 10 yards at the very least. King Dwi decided that it was now time for him to go out into the world. King Dwi was unaware of what was happening in Karasthea, and when he reached it, he was surprised to find King Rm at the mercy of all the other rulers in Achaea. Swords were pointed at the neck of the tyrant king, and it was King Dwi who begged the other rulers to spare his life. King Dwi was now the only one with a dragon, and without any contestation from the other rulers, he was crowned as the second emperor. Some say that it was not to be, but nobody else could voice out his concern. The dragon lived for many years before it finally succumbed to death in its old age. Since then, it has been our tradition to have an emperor to oversee all the 14 provinces of Achaea, to ensure that there will be balance all throughout the land. King Rm's lineage was cut from the royal line. But he had a son, Lucrin. Lucrin despised the life that he had after the king was removed from power, so he vowed to search for the body of his father's female dragon. Lucrin traveled across the land, far and wide, believing that when the dragon fell to the ocean, it had managed to get away undetected. But as Lucrin grew older, he was unable to find the female dragon. On Lucrin's deathbed, it was rumored that he cursed the land of Achaea. At the top of his lungs, he vowed that Achaea's peace would cease when the dragon was found. Chaos would ensue. Then he died. Everyone who was listening to me was hushed. The little boys in front had their mouths open, while the elderly seemed bothered. Eyebrows were raised, foreheads creased. There was visible unrest among the crowd. What happened after that? Someone asked. Did they ever find the dead body of the female dragon? I grunted. Nobody found the female dragon, I said. It's common knowledge. Otherwise, we would see the dragons in flight again all over Achaea. Did Lucrin have a son? What happened to King Dwi and his black dragon? I sighed. This was what I was trying to avoid. Nobody ever got contented with dragon history. The people always wanted to know more, and I could only share so much about the dragons because the truth was, what I shared just now was also just passed on to me. But I had begun the story, and so I believed I had to respond to their questions. It was the least that I could do for them. According to legends, Lucrin had a son and a daughter. The son died when he was still young, but the daughter lived. Her name was Zanya. She was a fair maiden, and she was taken to the Locae Islands. But her ship capsized, and she was never seen again, I said. Ooh, the crowd responded in unison. Then they grew rowdy. So the dragon and Zanya ended up in the ocean. The end of Achaea is coming. When they return, all will die. An old man yelled. I glared at him but knew better than to argue. That's not going to happen. It's all just a story, I said. Well, part of history. But let's not twist it, all right? As though the emperor is not enough to worry about. The boy biting on an apple chuckled and choked. The girl beside him thumped him on his back, and the boy spewed out the apple's core. Zanya's lover went looking for her until he too gave up and decided to jump into the ocean to drown. But before he lost his breath, he found himself staring into the eyes of his love, and she rescued him from drowning. She took him underwater to live. Many moon turns later, she told him that she had found the last dragon's egg, I said. What happened? The crowd grew even more unsettled after that. What happened to the egg? So there really is a dragon? Tell us where the egg is. I was already flushing, perhaps due to frustration, as I tried to hush the crowd. Zanya said that she would keep the last black egg underwater because she didn't want to break the land. But her lover thought otherwise. So one day, while Zanya was swimming with the sea creatures, her lover stole the last black egg. She realized that the egg was missing, so she went after her lover. She said, "Do not release the egg. Give it back to me." But he replied, "No. I have dreams of ruling the world." I changed my voice several times to better portray the exchanges between the maiden and her lover. But the maiden replied that he would break Akean and not rule it if the last great black egg were released upon the land. Her lover did not believe it, though, so he ventured into the mainlands and left the ocean, which had already become their home. The maiden pursued him, but it was a futile chase. Because the maiden was no longer accustomed to the land, she grew sick and was rendered bedridden. It was said that every day, she would watch the sunrise from her window to see if Sisis would cease from shining and if the moons, Luna and Risa, would rise to light up the evening sky. But she was beginning to lose hope of ever retrieving the last great black egg again. And so, right before she met her sad fate, the daughter, like Lucrin her father, uttered a curse. She whispered to the trees, "Take this curse to my lover who has not abided by my rules. I curse you, heart of my heart. From now until your last breath, you will not rule Akean. You will be slow, and your power will be limited to trees. To grow trees. To care for birds. You will be soft and kind, and your soul will not be tainted. All that you so long wished to have, authority over the land, would never be yours." I paused before continuing, and that was how the tree runners came to be. "I never heard that story before," a boy mumbled. There were several yelps of "tell us more," but there was nothing to share anymore. Everything I knew, I had already told them. I also wondered if that was really how the tree runners came into being, but I have never gotten the chance to meet any of them yet, so I have no way of knowing. Besides, I have no intention of meeting one, now that their characters are in question. After many moon turns of being banished to Sinista, Akeans are not sure if the tree runners were still the same mild creatures they once were. The conversations among the audience went on. One remark interested me, though. "And so that's the reason why all birds leave their eggs in nests in trees. To confuse all citizens who would want to grab hold of the last great black egg. Because the truth is the last great black egg will never be found." I continued walking away towards where Arden was. I was sweating profusely when I reached him. I never intend to share the story of the dragons again. I wanted to bury it inside my head and stop perpetuating the hopes of everyone to ever catch one. I patted Arden's shoulder, and he gave me a curt nod before moving to the center of the stage to perform. It was time for me to move around and ask for coins from the audience. I received more coins than usual, and I knew it was because of the dragon story. Akean still loved to hear everything about the dragons.
Kino Amerk. The girl who told the stories about Dodo the giant hubbub and the last great black egg was quite amusing. Her voice fit her perfectly as a puppeteer because she could change it according to the role she portrayed. Her ability suited her perfectly. No wonder Pyper was excited to see the show. It was even worthier when the storyteller performed the dragon story retelling. "Have you seen her perform before?" I asked Pyper. "There was no performance earlier. I bet they just arrived. The vendors told me that they pop in and out of here like mushrooms. I can't wait to see the Swordless Swordsman perform. I bet he can top the storyteller," said Mayo. I squinted in front of me. "Do you see him anywhere?" I asked. "No," Mayo said, biting into his third apple. "I want to catch a dragon." There are no dragons. They all died. Didn't you listen? I said. Mayo just continued biting on his apple, completely ignoring me. Pyper nudged me in the ribs. Look at him, she said. Isn't he pretty? I looked at where Pyper was pointing, and my gaze fell upon a blond young man. Blondes looked the same to me. You sound funny, she said, giggling. Yeah, Kino. You sounded like a gander, Mayo said. No, I didn't. I said. Then I put my hand around my throat, surprised by the low and throaty sound that I made. Dear gods, please, not that power, I mumbled incoherently in a girl's voice. Mayo doubled over, laughing. He clutched at his sides, and Pyper joined in. I blushed furiously and decided not to open my mouth again. Why did the gods play with my power? I mean, for 12 moon turns, they hid my power from me, and now that they finally decided to put an end to my agony, they gave me one that was so ridiculous, it was making me wish I was back to being powerless. I grunted and vowed not to open my mouth again unless I was sure that my voice had returned to normal. Have you heard of the Swordless Swordsman? The girl puppeteer asked in a loud, shrill voice. She was back on stage after roaming around collecting coins. The crowd cheered, pumping their fists in the air. I was caught in the moment, and I raised my clenched fist, but I made extreme precautions not to cheer. Only the gods knew what sounds would come out next. The girl puppeteer glanced at the young man with golden hair, and she seemed delighted by the crowd's welcoming attitude. The swordless swordsman sauntered to the front and raised his arms. He was beaming at all of us. I stole a glance at Pyper, who seemed positively taken by his charms. I frowned. Welcome to our show, he said. Today, you will witness the incredible talent that is, me, he said. His eyes wandered until they fell upon Mayo. You there, boy, he said. Huh? Mayo said. Pyper nudged him. Go, he's calling you, she said. But I don't want to be sliced, Mayo said. He can't slice you. He has no sword, remember? Pyper said. Swordless. Got it? The swordless swordsman urged Mayo to come forward. What's your name? He asked. Mayo looked at Pyper and me. The crowd started shouting, What's your name? Or give your name. Mayo, he said. The swordless swordsman chuckled. Come here, Mayo, he added jokingly. The crowd laughed. Pyper all but pushed at Mayo. Go. It's going to be fun. Then why don't you step in front? He hissed. He mumbled as he started walking towards the awaiting swordsman. When he was finally within arm's reach, Mayo stopped. The swordsman smiled at Mayo and looked at the crowd. Today, I'm going to show you something different, he said. To Mayo, he added, give me your apple. Why? Give it to me. Oh, all right, said Mayo. He looked at the apple longingly and took one big bite before handing it over. The swordsman put the apple with bite marks on top of Mayo's head. The crowd cheered as Mayo turned blue. My mouth hung open in astonishment while beside me, Pyper clutched at my hand. Dear gods, he's going to split the apple on top of Mayo's head, Pyper whispered urgently. I was speechless. My eyes were glued to the swordsman. Everyone else had gone silent. People pushed between Pyper and me to see what was going on, but by the time I found her again, she was a few paces away from me. The swordsman glided around Mayo more like he was a dancer instead of a swordsman. His movements were measured and graceful. Then he stretched out his hands as though he was holding a sword. He made several slashing movements before he raised his arm upwards. I watched as his arm fell forward to the exact level of Mayo's head. The crowd hushed, waiting for what would happen. Slowly, the apple fell from both sides of Mayo's head. The apple hit the ground in 2 equal halves. Mayo burped, most probably in fear. That was the moment the crowd burst into cheers. Did you see that? Pyper asked. What? The way he cut the apple? It's amazing. Who ever heard of anybody slicing things with air? No. Not that, Pyper insisted. Mayo ran back to where we were standing. I hate apples, he mumbled. The coins started piling on the hat while the swordsman began throwing pieces of fruit in the air, slashing his hands towards them. The pieces fell to the ground, either diced, or sliced, or cut randomly. I was delighted. So that's why he's the Swordless Swordsman, I said, grinning. Pyper was shaking her head at me. No. It's a sham, she said. What are you talking about? It's a sham. He can fool everybody here, but not me. He shouldn't be able to fool you either, she said. She was strangely cryptic, and I did not understand her at all. What are you talking about? I asked for the second time. Mayo was pressed closer to us. What's wrong? Pyper shook her head, and her curls tumbled. Then she stepped forward before she yelled, "It's a sham." The crowd looked at her. The girl puppeteer looked confused. The swordsman stared at Pyper as though he laid eyes on her for the first time. His blue eyes rounded. The swordless swordsman is not swordless, Pyper said, locking eyes with the performer.
Pyper, San Diego. I never thought that outside Nivedon, I would find someone like him. The swordless swordsman moved with so much grace that it was difficult to see what he was hiding, his identity. Things happened fast. I was unaware of what came over me, why I did what I did, revealing him for who he was. Before the crowd could react, the swordsman made a gracious bow and gave us a winning smile. Then he bade us goodbye. The crowd became upset and started shouting for more. Kino walked towards me and grabbed me by hand. "Let's go," he said, eyes pleading. "The crowd may not be so happy about what you did." True enough, when the swordless swordsman and the puppeteer briskly walked away, the crowd turned to me and booed. Mayo ran away, with Kino and me closely trailing behind him. When I thought that we had escaped the angry crowd, a tomato hit me in the head. Fruits started to fly behind us, and it was all I could do to not make myself invisible. "Run!" I yelled. "I'm sorry for the trouble," I shouted. "Keep running. Turn left. Over there," he said, pointing to a dark alley. All three of us ran in the same direction. By the time we entered the alley, thankfully, no one was following us. I pressed my back against the dingy wall. The air smelled of urine and rotten food. Mayo was scrunching his nose. "What came over you?" he asked, panting. "Yeah. What was that about?" Kino added. I closed my eyes, trying to recall what I had seen earlier. "He's got a sword." "I didn't see one," Mayo said. "How were you able to see it if I couldn't?" "Because," I said, pausing, "I have reason to believe he's a Niven." Quila Tash. Why did we end the show so soon? I asked. Arden had made me run away from the crowd after we made our attempted graceful exit. For a change, he took my box as we ran. That was nice of him. "I don't like being accused. Not in front of a huge crowd like that," he said. "Accused? It's a little girl saying you're not swordless," I said. "You should expect that. Every magician has a critic. What you should have done was to prove her wrong." "No. What I did was the best thing that I could have done," he paused. "We have to leave. I don't want any attention after this." I frowned. "But why? I don't understand." Arden continued walking away while I trudged after him. The sky had darkened, and it seemed like he had no plans of stopping. I figured that we could rest when we got to our place in the Loondu woods. When we reached our hut, Arden started putting his belongings in a pack. "What are you doing?" I asked. "We're moving." "Again?" "We're halfway across the world. Do you know how far that is already?" I asked, irritated because he was mum about what was bothering him. "Shut it, Quila." His nostrils flared a little when he shouted my name under his breath, and I began to worry about him. I backed down. He only called me by my name when something was really bothering him. Instead of asking him again, I decided to pack my stuff up too. If we were going to travel for a long distance, I could not bring the box anymore. So I took out the pack from under my bed and started putting the puppets inside it. When we reach our new destination, I will make a new box to hold my puppets. It seemed like a good plan. I glanced at Arden, who was still moving about hurriedly as his hands took the things that mattered to him before tossing everything inside his pack. When he had cleaned up enough, he slumped on his bed, his face worried. I decided to try talking to him again. I approached slowly and sat beside him. Then I tucked my feet under my legs. "This house was a home to us," I said. Arden nodded absently. "How long have we stayed here?" "Maybe a little over 3 months. 4, if we had not stayed too long with Nia, Goemi, and Miro. It is a nice place. I thought that we could stay here for at least 2 moon turns. That's why I made the beds," he said. I looked at him, trying to catch his eyes. "Then why don't we?" His eyes clouded. "Because. You know you can tell me, right?" I said. We were staring outside the window from the bed. The sky had grown dark. Under the pale moonlight, Arden's face looked soft and beautiful. "There are some things I can't tell you." "Not yet," he said. I fell silent, thinking, do you remember that time when I was still little and had to follow you on my own because you wouldn't talk to me? He nodded, smiling weakly. "I will do it again if I have to," I said. "I know," he said. "It's just that. I'm afraid." "Of what?" "The little girl. At the market. I remember when you discovered that I was following you. You were also afraid. Does that mean that little girls frighten you?" I teased him to ease the tension. He smiled at that, shaking his head. "It's not that." "Then what is it? What's bothering you about the girl that's enough to send us running off like this?" "She said I had a sword," he replied. "So what? It isn't true, right?" I argued. Arden put a hand over the left part of his waist. Then slowly, he pulled out a sword. He laid it on the floor below us. I stared in astonishment at the sword with a red gem encrusted at its hilt. "That is why I was afraid of the little girl," he said. Our eyes locked. My eyes were popping out of their sockets. "You can close your mouth now." I swear, if he had not told me to close my mouth, it probably would have hung open all the while that I was staring at the sword. "How did she know?" I asked. "I'm not sure," he said before pausing, "but she's as gray as the rest of us." "Us?" I asked, confused. "Yes, us. What you outlanders so fondly call ghosts," Arden answered, which made me more confused. "Ghosts? There are no ghosts. And Arden's not gray at all."
Kino Amherk. Something told me that we would not find the Swordless Swordsman again, but Pyper insisted that we look for him. It has been 3 days since the performance, and still, there were no traces of their whereabouts. "Do you know that if we had just continued our journey instead, we could be, I don't know, but it would be pretty far away," Mayo said. "We've got to find him," Pyper said, obviously determined. "Why?" Mayo and I said almost in unison. "Because you have this obsession with exposing him to the world?" I said. "Of course not. I'm not evil." "Then, why?" "We have other things to worry about, remember?" I said. Honestly, I was starting to get annoyed by all this. Then it hit Mayo and me. We were dallying, afraid to continue on our mission. I didn't say another word. "There." Pyper pointed excitedly at a small, dingy shop. There was no one outside. A sign hung on the door that said, "The Last Sniffler." "What are we going to do here?" I asked. "The Last Sniffler. I didn't think we could get this lucky," Pyper said as she turned to us. "Don't you get it? A Sniffler can lead us to them." Her eyes were literally sparkling. "We don't have any money to spare on a Sniffler. Plus, do you know how much the service of a Sniffler would cost us?" I asked. "This is too much." "What's a Sniffler, eh?" asked Mayo, likely to be ambiguous about what was happening. "I've been looking for one since yesterday. Snifflers have the power to track people by using their sense of smell," she said matter-of-factly. "I read about Snifflers before, so I knew what they were." "Oh, a sniffer," Mayo corrected. Sniffler, not sniffer, Pyper said. The power of a sniffler can make anyone burst into tears. They catch the awful stench that people's scents give off. Mayo laughed. Some power, he mumbled. Come on, Pyper said as she pulled both Mayo and me inside the hut. But we don't have any coins, I protested. Who needs coins? Pyper said before winking at me. She pushed the door, and it creaked loudly. It made sense that the sniffler did not have enough coins to grease the door bolts. There seemed to be hardly anyone needing his services, or maybe some did, and coins were hard to come by now. The waft of old paper and dust hit us like a brick wall to the face. Inside, there were tall bookcases, with light from outside struggling to seep through the glass windows that were filled with so many cobwebs that they started to look like decorations on the glass panels. A small table lamp lit up a decent part of the room. My guests for today, a thin oily man said. His curly dark hair was oiled too much and was combed so far back that no strand fell to his forehead. It made him look like he was up to no good and rather intimidating at the same time. Mayo gulped. Pyper walked towards the man. I wish to engage the services of a sniffler, she said. The man's eyebrows shot up with delight. I guess I am a sniffler. Pyper beamed. Great. Then it is my pleasure to meet you, sir, she said as she extended her hand to the man. I am Pyper San Diego. I almost cut her because she gave her real name, but then again, nobody knew her, so it should be all right. And these are my friends, she said, looking at me. Reno Crom and Cal Mayo. I had to paste a smile on my face. Our names were not good disguises. And my name is Boris Johann, the man said. I am, if I may put it, the best and only sniffler in town, the world, rather. He released Pyper's hand, and he scrutinized Mayo and me. Funny that you should need my services. Pyper's expression did not change. It was as though she was so accustomed to lying. Master Boris Johann, we're looking for a thief, Pyper said. He took something that is sentimental value to me. A locket that my great-grandmother gave me before she passed away. A locket? Yes. It's made of gold. The man grinned. The flickering light of the lamp deepened the shadows that lined his face as his teeth glistened in the half-lit room. I cringed. Now we're talking, he said. How much for 1 day of your service? Pyper asked. The man leaned back in his seat and raised his feet on the table, all the while counting with his fingers. 100 gold coins, plus an additional payment for food and carriage, he said. Pyper's eyes rounded, and it made me wonder if she was feigning surprise. 100? She asked. But that's a lot. If I have 100 gold coins with me, why would I go search for my locket? I might as well melt the coins and look for a blacksmith or a jeweler and ask him to craft me a new one. Mayo laughed his fakest laugh. He did that at the most inconvenient of times. The man's face froze. Memories, my dear, he leered. There was something about the way he said memories that made my blood curdle. As though all of this was not eerie enough. I am the last sniffler, he exclaimed in a booming voice. This was the opposite of lunacy, and I wanted to run out of the shop to escape from him. Don't you know how loathing it is to think of someone's face or scent and consciously retain them in the head? It's like I could smell them everywhere, and every breath I take only makes me inhale more of the scent. And mind you, I cannot filter which scent to retain. If a man reeks of both filth and flowers, I cannot choose to retain only the scent of the flowers. It would always be both. And the scent could become so strong that I could almost taste them at times, he shouted, his ghastly lecture filling the corners of whatever sad excuse he had for an office. He then thumped his fists on the table, leaned towards us, and leeringly said, That's why you have to pay me a lot. You won't be able to find another who can offer you the same services because, like what I've told you, I am the last sniffler. Then, as though he was confused, he added softly, Which part of that don't you understand, children? Is that how your power works? You just think about someone's face and, Pyper asked. The sniffler's face darkened. You think it's that easy? Never. Thinking is easy, but to smell someone's stink is most definitely not. Pyper's eyes twinkled as though she understood before she shivered visibly. Then, she cried. Wait, not here. What is this? Don't cry on me, I beg you. The man said. He was obviously disturbed by the contrived sobbing. It's from my grandma. And it's. The man stood up so fast that his chair crashed onto the floor. The last Sniffler grabbed Mayo and me by our shirts before dragging us towards the door. Then, the Sniffler turned to Pyper, grabbed her by the collar, and shoved all of us out of the shop. Out. Go. I don't need you, penniless clients. Out. He shouted, frustrated that he failed to make a deal for the day. We sank to the ground right in front of the shop. Mayo was grimacing as he put both of his hands on his buttocks. I stood up slowly, grunting at the pain that was shooting up my legs. He's a bad man, I said. When I looked at Pyper, she was sitting, staring at me. Her eyes were searching mine. How do you feel? She asked. My butt hurts, I grumbled. Not that, she said. Normal. I yelled. Let's go. And quit grinning. We know we didn't have any money to spend on a Sniffler, yet we still went to him. It was a terrible idea. Pyper stood up excitedly. Let's run away now. And while we're at it, let's make sure that nobody comes in close contact with you, she said. Why? I asked. Pyper started sprinting with Mayo and me trailing behind her. Because I think I have figured out how your power works, and I don't want your sniffling power to vanish so quickly, she said. She glanced back and winked at me.